Cheers.
Yay, to an awesome podcast is a spiced red dragon chai.
Oh, I can't wait.
I love this tea. It's my absolute favorite tea.
Oh,
Shout out to Stash for making awesome spiced red dragon tea. If they want to sponsor this, they're welcome to.
shout out Stash. Mm.
Love.
Yeah, that is really lovely and smells great.
It feels festive for this time of year.
It does.
Hell yeah. All right, let's get started.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. You're tuning in to the Perfectly Powerfully You podcast, a space of epic positivity, radical self expression, and transformational growth. Join me in celebrating this beautiful thing we call life with even greater ease, flow, and authenticity.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Perfectly Powerful You podcast. I'm your host, Nikita, and I trust, hope, and expect you all are having a wonderful day. For those of you who are watching, I'm with special guest Rob. Rob, how are you today?
I'm fabulous. Thank you.
That is the word I would use to describe you most days.
Oh, I
Because,
love that.
yeah, fabulous in the way that you dress, your energy, and also the way you just walk in general is fabulous.
Oh, thank you. I've got to come here more often.
Yes, you will get compliments aplenty because there is so much to go
Aw,
around,
you're too sweet.
especially the earrings. We have to give a shout out to the earrings as well. Who did you say made them in town?
Um, Her name is Lynette, and she's of Rockfish Creations or Jewelry. She's great, local indigenous woman. Love her beading work. And yeah, I just feel gorgeous when I wear them.
You look gorgeous while wearing them. And I'm
Thank
also
you.
loving particularly the triangle design and then the way that it tapers outward.
Mm.
It reminds me of a jellyfish,
Oh,
actually.
interesting. I love here. I feel like it does, these earrings particularly do spark connections for people.
Yeah,
I feel like a parrot when I wear them.
carrot
But
colors.
yeah. And there's just something about the weight and the swing to them. But I love that.
Yes, and also the share vibes you
Yeah,
were saying before.
very share.
Is that a move that Cher does that, by the way, with
Yes,
hair?
well, that's a matter of opinion. If you ask, so, there's a whole thing on Drag Race about this because
Oh,
everyone, when they imitate Cher, they do that hair flip. And then Chad Michaels, who is like a Drag Race legend, but also a number one Cher impersonator, she famously is like, "You'll never see Cher flipping her hair. She never does this." So,
really?
matter of opinion.
Okay. And are there videos to say whether or not Cher does this?
I'm sure there's gotta be in this woman's career, she's gotta have hit a good hair flip at least once.
Well, she has the
You
hair
know?
for it.
Yeah, she does.
But other than Cher, Rob, thank you again so much for being on this podcast. I know it is going to be so juicy with all of the beautiful nuggets because, as we were talking about before, you are someone who really embodies what this podcast is all about, which is radical self-expression, which you do so fabulously, and positivity, and people who naturally and also actively embody what it means to live the life they absolutely love living.
Mm.
And from what I know about you as someone who is not only a traveler, but also a beautiful, beautiful dancer,
Aw.
a fashionista, and just someone who has so much fun in life. I want for people to know even more about you and especially your business, which we're going to talk a little bit more about throughout this podcast, Gusdal Projects. And it embodies the work that you have when you combine your dancing and your self-expression. And so I would love for you to talk a little bit more about how this came to be and what inspired you and what got Gusdal Projects to be where it is today and where you also hope for it to go.
Totally. Well, thank you so much for having me. It is such a treat to chat with you, to share with you, and I'm so excited to be here. So, I guess I could start with like the basic information about me and like I guess what I do for work, my business entities, and go from there. So after high school, I went right to dance school. I went to Concordia University in Montreal and I
Mhm.
studied contemporary dance and choreography. And I had like always really loved performance. I've really loved dance. I've really loved movement. I like discovered it maybe at a later age. It was kind of a Billy Elliot effect, if you're familiar with that musical. It's
No, I feel like you've been
oh,
teaching me so much about musicals because we've already
yes.
talked about Wicked, but
We've
Billy
already got
Elliot,
into
yeah.
the wicked of it all. If you know, you know. But yeah, Billy Elliot, it's kind of just like this phenomenon. It's a musical, and it's the story of a boy who discovers dance, like in his teenage years, and just kind of falls in love and dedicates his life to movement and to dance. And this is a pretty common phenomenon that you see with boys in dance a lot. It's like that idea that like young boys are not put into dance, they're not exposed to dance. They're more so put into like soccer or swimming lessons or Boy Scouts or those other like typical traditional boy things. And there is like this phenomenon of like young adolescent boys or like young men kind of discovering this world of dance for the first time, and there's no turning back. And that is really how I would describe my initiation or relationship with dance from the beginning. It like very much follows that trajectory of like one day just discovering dance and movement and then never going back.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so I did my degree in dance at Concordia and moved back to Ottawa at first. That's where I was born and wanted to like have my own little dance studio and was also doing some government work, which is a weird side tangent. But then the pandemic happened
Mm.
and we lived in a footloose era where dancing was illegal, right?
Mm.
It's like you couldn't go out dancing. You couldn't. I worked in a studio that was subsidized by the city of Ottawa.
Mm.
And so I was like, I had a couple of dancers that I would work with, but obviously in a pandemic, you can't work interpersonally. And I
Mm.
couldn't, that space was run through the city. So their insurance would no longer cover me. So I was told like I'm not allowed to dance anymore. And it was really devastating. I like just graduated. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna start this career in dance and things are gonna take off. Um, and then it was totally halted. And so I kind of
Mm.
thought, how do I keep moving? How do I keep being inspired? How do I keep creating? Um, and that's really how I found an entryway into visual art practices, which kind of became this like larger entity that I now call Gusdal Projects, that is always going to be movement rooted and focused in dance first. I always say that's like my primary medium. That's like where I generate ideas from is from movement. But sometimes I really have fun taking those ideas and those concepts that I explore through movement and try to explore them visually as
Mhm.
well. And yeah.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot of beautiful information that I also didn't even know about you, that
Whoa.
not only do you have a degree in dance,
Yes.
but you also discovered this. This is something that I thought was really interesting, that um you came to find dance what we call later in life, that
Yeah.
may not have been typically, and you mentioned it very well, that sometimes we are kind of pushed down certain lines and what feels like very heteronormative,
Mm,
where it's like, okay, well, boys do soccer, girls do dance, because there were so many girls that I knew growing up who just did dance. That's
yeah.
what they
You do
did.
ballet class and you do your like jazz at 5 years old,
Totally.
whatever.
Yeah, I even took some classes. It wasn't for me and when I was younger, but movement is still something that I love incorporating. And you were also mentioning that your Gastol projects is the movement visual arts form of what you love to incorporate in life. And it
Mm,
was born out of the fact that for a time it was illegal to dance together at the level
yes.
of fact we weren't allowed to
Yeah.
because we were wanting to keep everyone safe. Could you tell me more about what that involves, your visual arts versions of movement and
Mm.
what that looks like?
Totally. So, as a contemporary dance artist, specifically a Canadian contemporary dance artist, because I do think that that distinction matters.
Mm.
Um, I think of dance and the way that I experience dance is maybe different than a lot of people who are not exposed to like the contemporary dance world. I think a
Mm.
lot of people when they imagine going to a dance show, it has to have like people doing turns and pirouettes and big grandiose jumps, and it's probably in people's mind telling some kind of a story. Maybe it's a love
Mm.
story, maybe it has a beginning, middle, and end, or maybe it's about something usually.
Yeah.
And this is really not how I experience dance as a contemporary dance artist. I hold that contemporary dance as a genre and like as a qualifying, it only needs to be contemporary dance, it only needs to be movement that involves time and space.
Mm.
And aside from that, another categorization of Canadian contemporary dance is that it really rejects codified forms, and it
Mm.
also really rejects narrative. Um, so when I am starting a dance project, I really do try to root myself in a physical concept. So trying to like embody some kind of a physical cue, a physical stimulus, and it could be anything. It could be gravity, it could be momentum, it could be crawling. These are all kind of physical cues that I want to maybe start from. And then kind of try to negotiate these physical cues through time and space. So
Mhm.
shifting the way that we engage with these physical cues, and understanding how these my body or other bodies are navigating time and space. And this is where the work kind of grows from. That's the seed that I start with. And so when I was not engaging in movement anymore in the pandemic, that is, I guess I kind of started to think, where can I visually experiment with these simple concepts that are movement, time, and space? Um, and I kind of started maybe abstracting that and thinking like, okay, well, what is the essence of when I create dance? Like, what am I trying to make, or what are values that come up? And there is like a heavy value of labor. There's a
Mm.
heavy value of time. Um, and yeah, and these things kind of felt really important in like the incubation process of how I create dance. And so I was abstracting it out into visual life, and I started being like, hey, well, how can I like show through visual mediums that I'm engaging in an act of labor? Like, how do I communicate through a visual medium that there was like hours of work into this project? And how do I communicate space and time um, in a visual medium, I guess. And so for me, that became taking pieces of paper apart and weaving them together. In
Mhm.
I just love that when you look. So I make these paper sculptures,
Mhm.
basically these like paper weaved sculptures. They're usually 2D, not always, but usually 2D. And I just love, there's something architectural about them. I often use maps as like one of the weaves in what I create. So there's an architectural space element that's implied. When you look at the work, you can see that it was like physically deconstructed
Mm.
and reconstructed. So there's an implication of labor and time and physicality in the process. Like you look at it and you can imply that there was some kind of physical manipulation of the medium. And then it just kind of grew from there, and those practices have evolved into other practices. But I guess that is my bridge between dance or movement and visual art. That was like that first connection.
I, from what I've seen of your art, because we went to Sake Sushi here in town,
Yes.
and they have displayed some of your beautiful works of art there that I I really understand what you meant about the labor being that it was something that was whole,
Yeah.
that you purposefully took it apart, which I thought is also like a metaphor in and of itself to get to the itty bitty bits of it,
Yeah.
by being able to weave it together again, and the idea of the movement being part of it, and that labor and intensity that goes into something that visually is so stunning,
Thank you.
and architecturally as well, that you have to be able to see everything and have an idea of what it looks like at the end of it as well. So I'm impressed by the fact that you were able to take something that maybe during a time, especially during COVID, when people maybe weren't able to experience life in the ways that they want to, and a little bit of some constriction there.
Hmm.
But it sounded like you really turned something from what would have been like, well, I can't do what I usually do. I'm usually with people. Like, what am I going to do now? I'm just going to like sit back and do nothing. Like something beautiful was born out of it, which I think is so wonderful to see, that like in life not everything happens as we were expecting,
Yeah.
and we can plan all that we want, but some things still happen. We're like, what are we going to do with this?
Yeah, things definitely happen for a reason. It's interesting you bring this up, and I think that perseverance is really important in that
Mm,
because I say all this, and my pandemic experience was not like beautiful, happy. It was actually one of the more like it was a more traumatic period in my life,
mm,
and I guess I was part of it was not moving anymore, but part of it was the circumstances I was living in.
mm,
And I kind of, I guess, figured like if nothing is going right, like at a certain point, like something has to start going right. And I just kind of have to make that happen. And I like moving was not an option. So I guess it was, you know, persevering to just try to find that like next entry point.
I would actually love for you to touch a little bit more on that, because that's something that there I felt like there's some golden nuggets there, that um especially when you're saying that it probably was a more traumatic time in your life, and I don't know what experience you had, but I imagine that there was a lot of things you had to touch base with. But I would love for you to touch more on how, for someone who movement is such a beautiful and rich and inviting
Mhm.
part of your life, for someone where there wasn't that same maybe level of movement that you're used to, but also that there were some things that you had to touch base with, could you touch a little bit more, if you're comfortable, about how you were able to shift that part of you that maybe was experiencing some emotions, some maybe things that you didn't really love, but how you were able to overcome them and create from a state of maybe constriction.
Totally. I think that there's so many ways I could enter that question,
Yeah.
and there's so many ways that I could exit that question as well. And I think there's a lot that I probably could say about it. But if I could maybe pare it down to one thing or what I think is maybe the most true is the idea of like being really, really truly present in the creation process. I think that everyone who's a creative experiences artist block, and that could be from personal experiences. Like there could be personal effects in your life that are limiting on your ability, your capability, your access, you know what I mean? Like how much energy you have to put out. Um, and sometimes it's just like overwhelming in the process, or
Mm,
it's like daunting to think, I have to get to this point, or I'm producing this show, so I have to think about what the end goal is going to look like. And this is really counterintuitive to a healthy creative process. I think that like a healthy creative process, this is something a professor taught me in school, is there's really stages, like there truly are stages in your process, and there is an incubation stage, and there is like a generating stage, and then there's a creation stage, and then there's like a completion, finishing, sharing stage.
ah,
And it's really seductive when we're at the beginning of our creative process, especially to want to leapfrog to other stages of the
mhm,
process. And this is where I come back to like that idea where I started with about really being truly present in the moment of your creation, and being aware of when you're leaving each stage of the process
Yeah.
and not jumping the gun, like starting truly from an incubation space where you're just being curious about your idea and you're, you know what I mean? You're nurturing your idea. You're letting your idea, that seed germinate. You're letting that
Mm.
idea spark and grow roots. Um, but you can't do all that. Like your idea can't grow legs if you're already thinking of how you're going to present it. What gallery is it going to live in?
Mm.
How long is the work going to be? Who's going to buy it? You know, like these things are really inhibiting to the growth at the beginning of any creative process. So I think um even when you're in those like crunch times and maybe, you know, I have a deadline and so I'm feeling the temptation to skip certain stages in my creation, or I'm feeling like really maybe having a depressed moment or I'm feeling like anxious about something, really just trying to truly root into the present moment and asking like where is this idea and what does this idea need and how can I best nurture this idea, not concerning about the future or the past.
Wow, I have to snap to that
Heck
because
yeah, snap.
there's I think that's such a beautiful point to touch on, especially since I think that each and every one of us are creatives in our own way.
Hmm.
Whether or not it's like the stereotypical like music or
Yes.
drawing or sculpting or painting or dancing, like whatever it is, like it's even being a teacher or a
Yeah.
doctor or like someone who is a professional speaker or
Hmm.
like a seamstress, like whatever it is, like
Yeah.
all of this is creation.
Making coffee.
Making coffee is an art.
For real, making tea. I mean,
Making
like
tea.
this was artful and this was like the way that you presented me this tea and the care that you took to choose it, like it
It's
is.
creation. And when you said that it's honoring the present moment in each and every stage that you're creating. And I think that when you're saying to get to the root and the grounding of it, to be present when it is a baby idea,
Mm,
to nurture and honor it for what it is, knowing that eventually it will be presented, like, but there are still stages that are all beautiful
yeah.
in that. And so, for you as an artist, a creative, I would love to know more about when you're feeling like you're jumping the gun. Like, how do you
Mm.
know what comes up for you and you're like, oh, actually, like, I think I need to be here. But how do you know when you're not truly honoring each and every stage? What does that feel like for you?
This is so interesting, and this is I have a collaborator who I work with. She's like my best friend. Her name is Taylor Neal. Um, Currently they live in Australia, but we like
Mm.
did our studies together in Montreal. I moved to the West Coast with them. And our processes deeply fuel each other. And one of the ways in which we like really, really connect creatively and something that we talk about a lot, is our love for the inefficient.
Mm.
We love being inefficient. I love being inefficient. It's
Mm.
like so essential to my creative process. And I think that what you're talking about, like it's a really big cue and trigger for me if I'm jumping the gun, like you're saying, like to identify when I'm not in the present moment. It's usually when I'm like trying to lean into like a shortcut or an efficiency thing to be like, oh, if I do it this way, I can actually produce my work faster. For
Mm.
example, I love shooting 35 millimeter film. If I'm doing a project that's photography based, it's going to be film. I love working slowly. I love working intentionally.
Mm.
It helps me think about the time, the space, and the movement that's happening in front of the lens a lot more intentionally when it's through that 35 millimeter format. Could I do it digitally? Of course. Would it accelerate my timelines a lot? Of course. Would it make things like cheaper and more affordable? Of course it would. But I would miss a lot of that magic. I would miss a lot of that magic of waiting, like that the moments where I'm in, you know, like taking time to find the right shot for a thing
Mm.
and then sending it off to get developed, waiting to get my scans back, taking the time to edit them, then thinking about how they would be composed in it. Like there's all of these steps that are deeply inefficient in that process of photography, but that inefficiency creates room for expansion that I just don't think that as an artist I experience that expansion, and I don't think the project or the process is as satisfying when I'm like really, really focused on being efficient and getting things done quick. And, like it poisons it for me. So that's a really big like part of how I work. And maybe like a canary test for if you're in the present moment, you know?
What's a canary test?
A canary test would be like it's an old saying in the mines they would have canaries
Hmm.
because they're really sensitive to I want to say CO2 or some kind of a gas. Someone in the comments can say, but they're sensitive to gases. And so if there was a gas leak in your mine, the canaries would die first. So if you're a miner, you would
Oh,
always have a canary with you to be like, oh, if my canary died, mama, there's a gas leak and I need to get out.
yeah, totally.
And so that's why I say, it's like it's a good early sign or early signifier in your process for me if I'm skipping steps.
Oh, okay. So what would you consider your canary test when you're finding that? Because what I'm hearing, and I'm also really loving this, and I'm taking some mental notes from this as well, that um we'll get to the canary test in a second.
Yes, yeah.
But something that really stood out is this idea of being methodical in your work, being intentional in
Mm,
your work. And you said inefficient, but I would also, I want to, at least for the way that I understand this, is being methodical and very, like a very active process in something where in this day and age, there is a lot of do, what's next,
yeah.
get it done, like production. And that can be, especially when that feels like a very powerful vibration in our society, where
Mm,
it's, what are you doing next? Like, it's great, you have a film out. Okay, when's the next one? You're like, dude, I just spent months creating all of
yeah.
this, and now like there was so much that went into this. I just want to celebrate this right now.
Mm,
So that I just want to honor the not only like the methodology but the methodical ways in which that you construct your art, because I think that there's a certain level of energy that goes into I'm just doing this to get it done versus I am doing this every step of the way because I love what I do.
yeah.
I'm excited for when it's finished, of course, because eventually if you keep working at it and playing with it and adjusting it, it will be a finished
Yeah.
product one day. But I also love that there's this idea that it's just like life. We're not going to keep running the race and then one day we're dead and then we're like, okay, and that was my life. Like life is meant to be enjoyed every step of the way,
Yes.
just like our projects.
Yeah.
And so I would love for you to share, what is your canary test? Like, when do you know that
Mm.
something is a little bit amiss? And when do you need to start presencing yourself more to enjoy more of the process of creating art?
It's about joy and it's about play. Like if I'm not having fun, um, if I'm not enjoying, like I feel like if I'm not if there's no joy in it, um, I'm losing the idea. Maybe. Maybe I need to think about it more.
Mm,
Joy is important, efficiency is important. If I notice that the efficiency is, I think I would go back to that as my like canary test, as I said originally, because the reason I say that is as I reflect in real time
yeah,
is I find if I start in leaning into efficient processes,
yeah,
it's because I'm maybe wanting to accelerate the process. I'm maybe wanting to like get it done quickly or
yeah.
move through it quickly instead of luxuriating in the
Oh,
process.
I love that word.
I only work on things that I like to do. I don't work for other people. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
in my art practice, I'm really independent. I like work on things that ignite me.
yeah.
Um, and things that ignite me, I I I want to take time with. I want to enjoy. I want to like nurture it. And so if I'm noticing like either a conscious or a subconscious pattern of um rushing
Yeah.
or moving too quickly, moving fat my brain moving faster than my body maybe, um that is like totally a sign that I'm not really loving the project I'm working on.
How? There are so many things that I'm just like digesting here with what you're saying because it's causing me to reflect on some of the ways in which, especially in what I do with particularly in the realm of baking,
Mm,
it's somewhere where I find so much passion and love. And I do it because there's a level of um care and time. Like you can't rush some things.
yeah.
And I find that when I'm rushing through something, it is very obvious what happens because
Yeah.
the product just doesn't turn out. And I know I'm like, oh, Nikki, like you cut corners. And I
Yes.
knew like as I was doing, I was like, I'm cutting corners here, but I just trying to get it done because I fell into this mentality as I was doing it that I needed to get it done.
Yeah.
And so when you're finding that you're not having, actually, no, I just rephrase that question. How do you incorporate more fun and love into the
Mm.
process of what you're doing to continue to ignite that spark in everything that you're doing?
That is such a good question. It's a good question and it's hard to answer because it feels natural.
Totally.
It maybe like does require a little bit of reflection and maybe if you ask me in another week, my answer might be different. However, if I were to answer it now, I mean, like an easy answer is I work with people who I like.
Mhm.
I work with people who make me feel good. I
Yeah.
work with people who see me, respect my art, respect my process. So there's joy in that.
Yeah.
Like there's validation in that. There's momentum in that.
Mm.
In like in collaborating like with yeah, like consciously and ethically and in alignment. Like there's so much momentum in that and there's so much joy in that.
Yeah.
So maybe that's like a huge cue. Again, like I kind of mentioned before, I also just like I don't do contract work. Do you know what I mean? Like I don't choreograph for other people. I don't unless I mean unless it was a really cool project that someone's working on that I would really love to collaborate with them on. That's totally different, but I don't do things I don't want to do,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
You know?
For sure.
And so it's like, well, I love what I do. I love the project I'm working on. I love the people I've surrounded myself with.
Yeah.
So joy is kind of a default, I guess.
Oh, make joy the default.
Yeah.
I think that should be the motto for everyone in life.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
feel so fulfilled with like when I do what I do. And so it's just like easy to kind of find it's not easy, it takes work, but it's like once you're doing that work, finding and maintaining that baseline is a lot easier.
Totally. And I think we're all going to put our time, energy, work, love, labor into everything and anything in life. It's
Yeah.
just a matter of where you choose to put it. And I think if you're putting that same level of energy and love into something that you're actually enjoying doing, then it's life well spent, you
Yeah.
know?
And going back to the efficiency thing, if you're rushing and you're like getting through your task at hand and you're
Yeah,
like trying to like figure out ways to crunch on the task at hand, to get it done quick, to make room for other things, it's like, are you really loving what you're doing?
totally.
Maybe not. And maybe there are other values that come from that work that make it worth it. And
Yeah.
that's super valid. Um, yeah, that's maybe just what I always think. I'm like, "Oh, I wanna, like, stay in this rehearsal longer. I wanna, like, work with these people more. I actually wanna take my time and do things in a way that's slow and intentional," and that means I like what I'm doing in my mind. I'm like, "Oh, that I clearly like what's happening because 'cause I'm" yeah, sinking into it.
And like I want to mention the word you used before is like luxuriating.
Mhm.
And I think that there's what came to mind is like a litmus test
Yeah.
for life because I think when you're saying like I want to be here longer, like that's I think the epitome of what I deem successful people. When
Yeah.
they're living life and they're doing it in the ways that serve them really well, it's because they're doing things that they genuinely love every single day. But when you were mentioning that, like, I want to be here longer, I want to be with these people longer, and I really want to stay because I'm just loving what I'm doing. And so it was almost like the litmus test is, am I saying these things to myself? Like, what is my inner dialogue saying? Like, am I like, yes, like I want to be here? Like, am I drawn to it?
Yeah.
Or am I saying like, oh, actually, I'm trying to cut corners right now because I really don't want to be here because
Hmm.
what I'm doing isn't actually filling my cup and I'm just trying to get this done.
Totally.
And so
Totally.
way different mindset there. And so I want to switch tracks just a little bit because I would love for you to talk a little bit more about how you've incorporated, because I love the idea that movement is such a beautiful part of your life, and how you've taken it internationally.
Heck yeah.
And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about, because you've incorporated so many aspects of your life dedicated to movement, which I think is great for being able to release energy and expand yourself in so many positive ways. I think dancing and movement in general, in whatever way it is so healthy for the body. But I would love for you to touch a little bit more on the fun you've been having overseas and how that's
Yeah.
been a shift in your life and how you've been able to incorporate that in your life.
Okay, I would love to. I would love to. It's been a really exciting, I mean, so to let the people at home know, I've in 2022 and in 2023 I did artist residencies in Japan, um, for dance. And it was like such an amazing process. And if you're unfamiliar with what a residency might be, it can take many different shapes or forms. It's a pretty common way that artists work, specifically like create work, network, and exhibit work. And so each residency might be slightly different, but in its essence, it's a governing body or a gallery that has a space, and they invite artists to come and create in that space. The exchange being that they offer you time, space, resources, sometimes money, sometimes food, sometimes connections. And then as the artist, what you're offering as a deliverable is your labor, your work, your creation. Sometimes they want you to do maybe like a talk, like a seminar, a performance, an exhibition, whatever it is. Each one is a little bit differently. But I went to Japan in Yamanashi Prefecture in a very, very small town called Saiko. It's like Lake Saiko. It's right by Mount Fuji, if you're familiar.
So beautiful.
So stunning. And if you are familiar, it's right in the forest called Aokigahara, which is to like English friends, might be more commonly known as the Suicide Forest. And so that's where the land in which I was creating. I went my first year wanting to create a show that was basically responding to a somatic movement workshop I was doing in Montreal a
Mm.
couple years before that was working with survivors of sexual violence. Mostly, I was working with like the Women's YMCA in Montreal for that time. And so I was really hoping in Japan to take that material from the movement workshop and translate it into a functional movement score to be performed. That was basically the nutshell. But then life got in the way, and it was actually like a really difficult, challenging time to be there. My brother had some like personal crises going on. I lost a couple of grandparents in that like month while I was in residency and leading up to residency. And so I just was like so unrooted. And it was really challenging to be like confronted with death and dying and like ending and closing of cycles while being so far away from family in a culture that like really doesn't normalize like affection physically. Like it was, I just really wanted to like get a hug from someone. And as someone who's very much a foreigner in that space, I felt it was really, really, really challenging to be creative there. um, I had a really beautiful time, and I ended up making a lot of work, but it was definitely not the work I intended to make. Like the process really shifted in response to what I was feeling in my time there. And so I did end up making like a short dance film and some visual work. But the scope of what I did was so shaken. I wanted to go back the next year. Um, and kind of like work with the energy that like remains in that space for me personally, and also just like communally the energy that lives in that area. And so I went with my best friend. We collaborated on creating a show. Like, we really really wanted to perform to like the public in Japan. That was like a big goal for us. So we made an hour-long dance show. It's called Conduction. It's like it's a contemporary dance work. It's a partnering piece, and it's really about like emotional communication tools. It's about like how we, as like humans, do like non-verbally communicate so much language to each other through touch, through space, through intention, through a glance, through all of these things. And conduction is exploring the transfer of energy between people, and that's what we shared with the public in Japan. We also like made a zine while we were there that's called Death Cycles, and it's really reflecting um, on our relationship to Aokigahara, like the suicide forest, our relationship to death and dying, our relationships to life, and yeah, all of those beautiful things. So that's like the work that we did in Japan, and we got to tour that show around, which was like really validating, really um, big for us, like as creatives. And yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. I didn't realize that there was a lot of family stuff that came up during, especially being so far away from home. That must have been a very challenging time for you. And as someone who, it sounds like emotions are, well, emotions come up for all of us, but I know that more specifically in the way that you express your creativity, do you find that the expression of movement and the ways in which you create are different when you're in a state of maybe mourning versus in a state
Mm.
of how, when you chose to come back at a different level? Did you find that there was a different way that you expressed your creativity and your movement in the way that it unfolded for you?
Yeah, this is a big question again that I feel like I could answer in a million ways for me personally, because the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting, like the word state that you use, like states and like states of being,
Mm,
are ways that like contemporary dancers, including myself, work quite often. I mentioned earlier that like sometimes you can start working from a physical prompt, whether it's like gravity, momentum, etc. States of being count as that. So sometimes it's actually like really, really fruitful to try to create a state of being in the body as like performance. So sometimes when I'm in a studio space and I'm really feeling in mourning or in loss, or in depression or in anxiety, sometimes it can be really helpful as a creative tool to be like, okay, what in my body, like how does that actually look? Like literally, but also maybe metaphorically, like how does anxiety manifest in the body? Because it does. Like these states of being do manifest in the body. So there is a way to work with them practically. There is a way to embrace them and let them be a part of your process. It is very challenging to do alone, and maybe that's why I was really happy to have a partner, a collaborator the second time I went back. It was really helpful to reflect those states of being to another person, or to share that those like places where we are, I guess, with another person. So it does breathe into the work, um, as much as you let it, I would say.
Oh, I love when you mentioned that you embody the states of being, and when you're feeling either if there's some mourning or anxiety or depression that it manifests in our body. Is there a way that you help process these? We're gonna keep on the theme of movement because
Yeah,
this seems to be like just like the running theme for you,
I love
especially as a
it.
dancer, but
Yeah.
um for me, when I'm in a state of maybe like high anxiety, or if I'm in a state of like maybe really like I'm feeling really lethargic, there are different ways that like I move my body in order to help either release
Hmm.
or help to channel or help to ground. Um, do you have any practices that you offer yourself when you're in various states, whether you're really joyful and feeling full of like passion and expression, or maybe when you're in a state of mourning, depression, or anxiety
Yes.
that help you move that energy?
Yeah, there are two answers. I think that it's interesting, like, we're talking about manifesting a state, or yeah, like, working with a state of being that we already have, and I think that's one modality, and I think that you can also conjure a state of being, like, you can create a state of
Oh,
being,
I love this.
and so I do think that, like, I work with it in both,
Yeah.
and I think that both are super valid, and I think there's different ways physically um to maybe, like, poke at those threads of being.
Mm.
Um, Thank you. And so I think if you were manifesting a state of being, like if I was experiencing depression or anxiety or sadness, and I did want, and that is relevant to the work that I'm doing, and I want to like use that. Maybe stillness is a great way to actually investigate that. Asking through active inquiry, like, where does this sensation sit in my body? um do I feel sadness in my chest? I do that level of investigation. This would be what I would call, like, in dance, we would call this a somatic exploration. Just to like technical it, I would call this a somatic exploration. So I would start by identifying like the state of being that I found myself in. If it's a state that I'm interested in working with, I would start by exploring it by finding stillness,
Mm.
and then I would investigate it, ask where it lives in my body, acknowledge it, discover it, maybe offer it a shape, maybe offer it a color in my body, and then to further the investigation, I guess like the next step is, um, how does it move? Like, where how does this sensation or this state of being, 'cause it's a state of being that once we've identified it, we've found where it lives, we've given it a shape, we've given it a color, I think it transforms into a sensation from a
Mm.
state of being to a sensation. And so then it's like, okay, how does this sensation feel? How does this sensation move? Where does this sensation bring me physically? Um,
Mm.
and observe that, follow that, be true with that, don't try to filter it, but just observe how you move with that sensation. And then I think maybe to close off that practice, I would encourage you to maybe re-find stillness,
Mm.
and then redo an investigation, maybe investigate if that state of being has changed, if that sensation has shifted, perhaps where I was feeling in my chest, I've moved and I felt that sensation move to my tummy.
Mm.
Investigate what that feels like, investigate how that state of being maybe is different now, and then journal about it. And that's a creative process to create dance. That would be how I would describe a really great somatic approach to creating dance.
Mm.
And that would be with manifesting movement. Now, if you were conjuring a state of being, which is the other modality I would say I sometimes work with, and that's like if I find myself in that anxiety, depression, sadness, or joy, or at any state of being, and you want to maybe find yourself in a different state of being. So not working with where we're at right now, which is fine. I think that a really helpful tool to shift your state of being, and to find a new sensation, is actually through repetition. And it can be so simple. Um, you would be amazed, like if you enter a studio space and you feel some kind of a sensation or some sort of state of being, the simple act of just like jumping on the spot, like just simply jumping on the spot, or like shaking your head no or yes, like for a duration of maybe like 15 minutes, you will observe your state of being shift and your state of being change. Um, and so this is like another somatic tool, I would say, to like shake up the energy in your body, conjure a new state of being. These are both maybe like helpful creation tools.
Oh, I I'm loving all of this, and I'm just like taking this all in, luxuriating in it,
Yes.
and I want us to be where that leaves us, because I think that's such a great way for anyone who wants to be able to not only resonate, to honor, to be with their states of being. And I love that you incorporated this idea of movement being part of getting to know ourselves better,
Yeah.
getting to know what feeling states and emotions are being manifested
Yeah.
in our body. And thank you also for giving us the helpful tool of when we want to create something different. Because I think that's great to be able to honor what's here, but to also know that we are the highest source of our being and we can change our state at will.
We're alchemists.
We are alchemists.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah, and I think that we honor both, because I think that if there's something in us that is coming up, like we want to move it, we want to be able to transform and transmute that energy into something else. But if we don't honor it, it's just going to stay right where it is in our
Yeah.
body. And so, Rob, thank you so much.
Oh my goodness.
For
Thank
being
you.
on the podcast. You were such a light, you were such a joy, and it has been a pleasure to learn from you today, to gain so much wisdom from you. Is there anything that you'd love to leave people with before we say sayonara
Oh my
to
goodness.
our beautiful friends at home? To just shine a little light on their life. Any closing comments from you?
Oh, stay moving, stay wiggling, stay grooving,
Stay wiggling.
always.
Yeah.
Everyone can dance.
Yes, we
Even
can.
if you don't think you can, everyone can
But you
dance.
think you can dance. You
Yes,
can.
yes, yes. And yeah, sink into inefficiency. It will bring you joy.
Ooh, sink into inefficiency. Yes. And luxuriate in the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally, totally.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Rob. Oh,
Such a
you're
treat.
so wonderful. And for those of you who would love to see even more of Rob, because I know I would, but I get to live in the same town as you, so that's a
Ah,
little bit easier for me.
yes, yeah.
But for those of you who want to get in touch, I have Gusdal Projects. We have a little card here. You can't see it, but I can. But gusdalprojects.com, and also I will link that in the info.
.ca, not .com.
Oh, pardon.
That's okay.
We are Canadian
We
up in
are.
gusdalprojects.ca. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us today. It has been an absolute pleasure to be with you and all of this beautiful energy. And until next time, I trust, hope, and expect you all have a wonderful and wiggly rest of your day. And I will look forward to talking to you all very soon.
Yay!
Thank you all for joining me today, because it has been my absolute pleasure to be here with you. Make sure to give this podcast a 5-star review and share it with all your loved ones, because it helps in creating even more awesome content. If you're interested in learning how to effortlessly create even more health, vitality, and time and money freedom, sign up for my free monthly vision workshop live over Zoom. Until then, I hope you all have a powerful day, and I look forward to chatting with you all real soon.